Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the Australian World War II production of pattern 1907 bayonets. So these were made to fit the Australian No. 1 Mark III rifle, or the short magazine Lienfeld, SMLE. And these were manufactured in both Orange Arsenal and in Lithgow. So production started in Lithgow in 1940. Well, to be fair, production started in Lithgow in World War I in 1913. And throughout the First World War they produced a ton. In between the wars production slowed down. There's a couple of references out there that it stopped in 1927, but it appears that's not the case. It did continue all the way through until 1940 when it started up again in a big way. So for the sake of this video, we'll say production for World War II started in 1940, because prior to that they were only doing a couple hundred per year to keep the tooling and the capability open so they could manufacture them. So in 1940 they started producing them at Lithgow. Well, they were already producing them, but they increased production at Lithgow. So I'll use this one here as an example because it's quite easy to get out and it has not been nickel plated. So all the metal components, being the blade, crossguard, pommel, push button, and the metal components on the scabbard, were all produced at Lithgow. The wooden grips, so before 1941, in 1940, in the first half of 41, the grips were produced at Lithgow. So they did it themselves. But in 41, production moved out to the Slazenger Sporting Goods Company in Sydney. And you can always tell when you've got one of theirs. I'll bring it in nice and close. You can see marked on the grip it says Slaz 42. Slaz is an abbreviation for Slazenger Sporting Goods Company, and 42 is the year of manufacture. So prior to Slazenger, they were not marked. And I have an example of that here. It's a pretty worn grip, so you can't make it out, but yeah, there's no Slazenger marking on that, so you know this was produced at Lithgow. I'll get to that Australia marking in a minute, that's not original. Now the scabbards, they had the metal components produced at Lithgow as well, and the leather on the scabbard comes from the Mangrovite Belting Company. So when I do a dive into the markings, I'll go through that, but they're pretty well marked. So it's just a leather scabbard coated in shellac and oven dried. It's quite a bit harder and more durable than the British one. So the other 1907 scabbards made. Like I'll bring my World War I Wilkinson out, and that leather is nowhere near as nice as what you have on these. These are quite robust in comparison. The frogs were made in Australia, so we had the pattern 1937 frog, which is just your canvas frog. This is not an original, this is actually a Belgian similar frog, but it fits pretty well, so it's fit for purpose. I'll use it for this. And we also used the pattern 1914 leather frogs. So these differ slightly from the English 1914s, and I'll get into that now. So there's one very, very distinct difference, and that is the English frogs taper, just here. So all your British, South African, not sure about anyone else, maybe Indian, I don't know, all their frogs taper in, whether the Australian frogs go straight up. Great, the blade's a bit grotty, probably needs a wipe down. So, yeah, production started again in 1940, well, stepped up in 1940, and it stopped in 1945 after the war. So after the war they had decent stocks, and during the Korean War they did start producing bayonets again, but they weren't these, they were the shortened Owen gun bayonets that were only 10 inches in length, and they started issuing those with short magazine Lienfeld rifles in Korea. Don't get me wrong, the P1907 was still used, but they started to use something a bit shorter, a bit handier in Korea. So this is a very good example of a frog. So this is an original World War II Australian frog, and it's got a unique belt hanger here, which was designed specifically for the jungle in the later war. So taking a look at the construction, it's not really too different from a standard British P1907 bayonet. There is one small minor difference, and the one in the scabbard as well, being the leather. So taking a look at the blade, it's a 16-inch blade, which was inspired by the Jap Type 30 bayonet, which itself was inspired by samurai swords. So you could say this is 16 inches of British steel inspired on a samurai sword. It's got a nice rounded fuller, both edges of the blade. Nice thick blade, as you can see. Down to the crossguard, obviously the early versions of these had the hooks, and they stopped manufacturing hook quillins at Lithgow in 1915. 1912 everywhere else, we were a bit behind. So nice little straight guard there with the muzzle ring. Moving down to the handle, got the two wooden grips. This one's been replaced, as I previously said, retained by the two screws. Now there is a special tool you can get your hands on to remove these. They're quite hard to find. It's pretty common just to use a screwdriver and use a grinder to hollow out the middle. That'll do the trick. Got a pommel, center push button, got a little inspection hole, and mortise here for fixing to the rifle. Now this mortise is not too well known, but this is actually one point that does differ from the standard British. So let me just grab my Wilkinson. You might notice there that the Lithgow is quite flared. And the reason for that is it allows it to be fixed to the rifle quicker and easier. So similar to all your sport guns these days, your sporting pistols with flared mag wells for fast reloads. Looks like the Aussies were onto that in World War II for speed loading bayonets onto your rifle. So as you can see, it's flared out to the side there a bit more, and it's got a deeper flare in the bottom there than what you find on other P1907s. And even when you compare that to a Korean War manufactured own gun bayonet, they did away with that. So that was something unique to World War II production. Actually, I don't know if that's World War II production or Lithgow in general, because I don't have a World War I example to compare it to. If you have one, maybe comment below, let me know. I'd love to find out if it's unique to Lithgow or just World War II production. It's quite interesting. Then moving on to construction of the scabbard. Put that to the side. So we've got standard P1907 scabbard. There's a couple of different buttons you can have. World War II production only had this this big sucker. World War I had a little teardrop. And then the frogs, as previously described, just the canvas frog. On an Australian one, this would be fixed. It would not slide, because this is obviously a Belgian one. And then on the frog, the leather frog, the P1914, we've got the retaining strap up here. So we'll jump into the markings on the blades and the bayonets, and we'll start with the nickel plated one. So this one here has been nickel plated for drill use, I've been told. I'm not sure if this is an original that's been nickel plated by the Australian Army, or some collectors done it up to make it look like a drill bayonet, but whoever's done it, they've done quite a good job on it, because oh goodness, it's a really tight fit in the scabbard. It's obviously because of nickel plating. The blade is absolutely gorgeous. Probably one of the better nickel platings I've seen on a blade. And even with the nickel plating, that is the sharpest P1907 I've come across. That is really sharp. Absolutely gorgeous. So, markings. This one has a couple of unusual markings that aren't typical. Well, they probably are typical for the year of manufacture, but you won't find them on many of the Lithgow and Orange Arsenal bayonets. So first off, at the top we've got our government acceptance mark, being the broad arrow. I've got two of those. So the one on the left is an inspection mark with the crown and the L underneath. L being for Lithgow. There we go. And there's another inspection mark down the bottom on the left there. And that looks like inspector number 7 at Lithgow. It's got a little crown, 7 and an L. To the right of that lower inspection mark, we have an X. The X is another inspection mark stating it's passed its bend test. And then an MA. MA is the abbreviation for Lithgow. Now, there's a little bit of conjecture as to what it actually stands for. For whatever reason, some people seem to think it stands for Magravite Arsenal, which is not a real thing, but that's what you'll find on Wikipedia if you have a look. I believe some fella wrote that in a book once and everyone's just blindly believed it as truth. Some people will tell you that it stands for Made in Australia, but from what I can tell, the most reliable source being Ian Skennington's book, British and Commonwealth Bayonets, is that it's an abbreviation for MACARMS, which is an abbreviation itself for Machinery Armaments Lithgow, which was the name of Lithgow back in the 20s when this marking was first introduced. So you first see the MA introduced onto these bayonets in 1926. So they're very, very typical on World War II production. Then on the reverse, you have the pattern, which is MA 1907-1, so the first Lithgow pattern for 1907. And then below that we have the date of manufacture. We've got 9 and 41, 9 being the month, 41 being the year. So moving down, we've got Australia marked in the grips. So that was not done here in Australia, that's an import mark in America. So anyone watching in the States is probably very, very aware that when arms are imported into America, they've got to have the country of manufacture clearly stamped or clearly marked on the weapon. So that's been put on there when imported. To some people it decreases the value of the bayonet, but it's just another part of the story, so I don't mind it too much. So this is obviously a pre-Slazenger woodwork grip. Otherwise it would be marked with slaz, even though it is pretty worn, it might be difficult to see. And then on the pommel, we have a serial number. You'll notice it has a letter prefix. So I've got a little sheet here provided with the prefixes. So no letter prefix indicates it's made between 1913 and 18. An A indicates 18 through to the early 20s. A B indicates 20s through to 41. So this is correct for 1941. C is also 41. D is 41 to 42. E 42 to 44, and F is 44 to 45. Now this is the best information I've found online, but I've already found one inconsistency, and that's in the next bayonet I'll show you in a moment, being that it's got a C prefix but it's made in 42. So I'll place that down. Now we'll have a look at the markings on the bayonet, on the scabbard, sorry. Now this has, get it up nice and close, a little broad arrow with an EFD below it, and beneath that is, can't quite make out what's below the EFD there. So I think that this is actually Enfield produced. There we go, that's nice and focused. So this just might be a spare that was used when making these scabbards. And then at the base down here, we have the remains of a Lithgow star with an A in the centre. That's just here. So that would indicate that this is actually a World War I production, this piece here. Either that or it was just left over and they used spares when constructing this, because ordinarily you'd find an MA marked here and an MA marked up here as well, unless it's Orange Arsenal, then it'd be an OA in each. So on the reverse down here, or the bottom down here, we've got Magravite 44, so it's a 1944 produced scabbard. It's clearly not a matching scabbard, which is a shame. And quite often with these Magravite scabbards, you will find a inspector's mark here, so you have a broad arrow with 2 letters underneath for the inspector. Now there is one thing that's pretty cool about this scabbard, and that's this marking just here. So that's a marking you'll find on World War One Lithgow bayonets, or World War One P1907s purchased by Australia, so Enfield, Wilkinson, Sanderson, whoever. The 2 Ds stands for Department of Defence. Then you've got the government acceptance mark, the broad arrow, and beneath that a 2. So the 2 is a military district number, and military district numbers are the same as postcode numbers or area code numbers on a phone number here in Australia. So 2 represents the state of New South Wales, which is where I am now, which is pretty cool. But that's something you'll find on World War I bayonets. You don't find that on World War II. So clearly this Magravite 44 scabbard has either had the caps replaced or it was made with leftover stock. So, oh god, that's tight. See if we can get that back in. It's about the tightest scabbard I've come across. So, moving forward, we have another MA. So this is what you'll more typically find. Come on, focus. Which is just the broad arrow, the X for the bend test, and MA. And then on the reverse, your date of manufacture. So what's that? 7 of 42, or is that 1 of 42? 7 of 42. As I said, this one's a bit weird because the serial number doesn't match up with the information that's online. So we've got a C number, which would indicate it's made 1941, but date of manufacture is 42. So I don't know, maybe they were manufactured separately and assembled later, I don't know. And I'll pop that down. Now, having a look at the frog here, the markings, we've got more Department of Defence markings, government acceptance. Got another broad arrow with a MI underneath it, which I don't know if that's an inspector. That probably is an inspector actually, because that's identical to what you find on some of the scabbards. So I'd say that's a inspector, because I'm pretty sure that's the same as what I have on, where is it? Oh. No, I don't have it here. I've got another scabbard somewhere floating around, and it has that same mark, which is the inspection mark next to the Magravite. Down the back, we've got the place of the company manufacturer, which is FS Limited in 1942. There's so many companies that made these. You'll find them with all different kinds of markings. Sometimes they'll have the place of manufacture, Adelaide, Sydney, what have you. And as previously shown, this one has the Slazenger markings on the grips, so that's what those look like, Slaz 42, and you'll find them incrementing up 43, 44, 45. I've even got some 53s on one of my own guns. And when these were refurbished later, you do come across a few of these with markings for 56, 55, because Slazenger was still making the grips, and the grips are still used as spares for refurbishment. So sometimes you'll find a 42 or whatever marked bayonet with a 56 grip, indicating it's just been refurbished. So last one we're going to look at here, this one here has our Orange Arsenal markings. So OA, if I can get that to focus, please focus. There we go. It's the same as the last one I just showed you, except instead of MA, it has OA for Orange Arsenal. Other than that, it is the same. Come on, focus. So it's got a pattern mark and manufacturer, which is 1043. Might take my word because this one doesn't want to focus. Slaz 53 grips, so this one's been refurbished. And generally, World War II production will have the number next to Slaz, whether refurbished or a Korean War manufacturer will have underneath. This one does not have a serial number on the pommel on either side. And the later ones, the Orange Arsenals, do have a couple extra markings down the tang, but I believe these are to do with the manufacturer. So we've got a broad arrow and just a number there. What's that, a 6 or a 9? I don't know which. And having a look at the scabbard, see if I can make that out. It's very, very worn, but above my thumb there is an OA. I'll use my Owen gun Scabbard as demo. So just above my thumb there, under the staple, is an OA. And you'll find the same at the top as well. For whatever reason, all the examples I have here are very poorly marked on the scabbards. Usually they're extremely clear. So these bayonets were used all throughout World War I, World War II, into Korea. In Korea, they were still used, but they were kind of replaced by the Owen gun, so a shorter replacement, because these were found to be just too ridiculously long. I mean, the fact that we were still using these in Korea is a bit ridiculous. The rest of the world ditched these in pre-World War I. The British were using the number 4 Mark I spike, and we're still using 16-inch sword bayonet. But yeah, by Korea, these were starting to be phased out, and they was retained in a ceremonial use. I was trying to think what else. So there's a couple other little interesting bits and pieces. So in 1944, there was an official modification to have a false edge placed on, and the exact length of the false edge wasn't universally agreed on. It was either 2 or 3 inches, and they're all a bit different. And they were put on by workshops, or AME, Australian Electrical Mechanical Engineers, in the field workshops in the rear esh. I don't have an example of one of those. I've never actually seen one of those. I've only seen reference to them in books. In 42-43, there was an official modification to these bayonets that was approved, and that was to have them sharpened from the factory, and the angle of the cut of the sharpening was 36 degrees, according to Skellington's book, British and Commonwealth Bayonets. Yeah, but that's about all the information I've got on these. If I've missed anything or made any mistakes, or you know, any cool little anecdotes, comment below, guys. I'd love to hear from you. Other than that, thanks for watching.